listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft and people who play it. Today is January 9th, 2023, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you doing today?
Spencer, hello. I'm doing well. We're back on another Monday because we just can't get back on a regular schedule. But here we are. We have a lot of stuff to cover, I think, and we got a little preview of some changes that are coming into the game this coming reset week. So I feel like we're in pretty good shape to do a Monday record.
Yeah, I think it's going pretty good. My work schedule has shifted in the new year, and so my Tuesdays have become a little bit tighter to try and fit things into. So we're adapting. We're adapting, but we're still doing the weekly show. It's still happening earlier in the week, and we're still getting it for Tuesday. So if you're someone who's liking the Tuesday shows, you're still having a show on Tuesday. So that's good. Before we dive into World of Warcraft stuff, Jason, I know there's a little bit of ABK stuff, some exciting stuff. If you want to go over that.
It's sort of tangential to ABK specifically, but this is very big industry news. Well, a couple weeks ago we talked about ZeniMax QA wanting to unionize, right? And ZeniMax is the parent company of Bethesda and many other video game studios that are under that business unit that Microsoft acquired back in 2020. Was that? So yeah, it was. I forget what the class of workers was, but I think it was like around 300 or 500 or something. It was a lot. It was a lot of workers at ZeniMax were wanting to unionize. They won their election. The union vote passed. That makes them the first official bargaining unit of Microsoft, like ever in Microsoft's history. These are the first unionized Microsoft employees. It's the largest video game studio union in the U.S. Microsoft formally recognized the union. No shenanigans, no busting, no trying to go to court over it. This is a huge win for those employees, and this could be sort of the impetus for bigger changes across wider parts of the games industry, of tech. I mean, Microsoft is obviously one of the biggest tech companies on the planet. They have a lot of different business lines, and to have that kind of bargaining unit under a Microsoft division that's pretty big. So congrats to them. I think that's great news for them. And good to see Microsoft sticking to the guns. They said that they were going to be, hands off if their employees wanted to form unions. And I mean, they proved it in this case. So that's good. I mean, obviously the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard is still up in the air, but this is the kind of thing that Microsoft is incoming steward of Blizzard. This is what we wanted to see, right? Is to say what they mean and mean what they say and let the employees do what they feel like they need to do and stay hands off. So very cool to see.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I'm glad that this all went through smoothly. It's not something that we ever expected to just go through smoothly. As much as, a lot of these companies' spokespersons get out there and say, hey, we'll be hands off and we're really pro, our workers and want to be sure everyone's happy. And as much as they do that, it isn't necessarily always the case when it actually comes down to, okay, well then we're going to do something like form a union. So it's great to see them just be like, yeah, sure, you guys form a union. There you go. Congratulations, you're a union. And like you said, first one within Microsoft, large step for the industry. It certainly sets Microsoft up in good PR in the sense of they are now an industry leader in what they're doing as far as that goes. So that's good for them. So hopefully this all continues to go smooth and people are getting what they want. So yeah, I'm excited about this. All right, diving back into World of Warcraft. Jason, I know you've been doing some raiding and you've been doing some killing of bosses. Yeah. How's it been going?
Very, very busy week. This was our first week in a while where we had 3 nights to raid because we didn't have the holidays. So we didn't have Sunday off. So we had 6 full hours of our regular raid schedule. And it was really fun. I mean, we got the normal clear up through Broodkeeper was really fast. I think we did the same thing where we did like 7 of 8 normal on Tuesday and then straight into 2 of 8 heroic, before the end of Tuesday night. So that set us up really well to have 4 more hours of raid for the week. Wednesday, we stepped in and re-cleared a couple bosses and started working on Dathia again, and it really just wasn't feeling very good. We weren't meaningfully progressing. We're doing a little bit better. And Dathia is a fight where it's really about executing the dance repeatedly. You have to split up into 2 teams and kind of just everybody's got to do their job consistently until the boss is dead. And this wasn't feeling great. So with about a half an hour left or so, we were like, let's go look at Kurag. Kurag is sort of nominally more difficult. Like, it has more stuff going on, and it's sort of positioned to be later in the raid. But I checked the stats on WoW Progress, and I'm like, well, you know what? Kurag's actually been killed a lot more in terms of percentage points than Dathia has in Heroic. So let's go look. And I think it was like 5 pulls, and we downed Heroic Kurag. We had to experiment kind of with order. The order matters a little bit more on Heroic Kurag for like which altars you take him to power up. I don't know if there's any right or wrong answer necessarily, but what we learned pretty quick was having stuff with frost that made you get out of the group resulted in deaths when we were fighting the ads. So we tried to do like fire, frost, and then a round of the other 2, and that worked pretty cool. I think the nice thing about that fight is it's flexible, so you can do stuff in different orders, and you can kind of figure out what works well for your group. So that felt really good. And then Sunday, last night, the kind of goal was, let's actually spend some time on Razageth on normal, because we hadn't really done that yet. We had like 3 quick pulls at the end of a night, a couple weeks ago, and that was it. On the 4-hour-a-week schedule, we were going for lower-hanging fruit with heroic bosses and stuff that we knew were going to be faster, if not, necessarily easier or whatever. So we did that, and it really, I don't know. It took like four or 5 pulls, I think, to work it all out. We had to kind of see each individual mechanic happen, and then it was like, okay, we know what to do for this next time or whatever. The tuning felt pretty good for a group at this point, but it is kind of a long fight. It's like a 10-ish minute fight. So a long wipe was 8-9 minutes of boss combat and then resetting. But overall, I thought the Razageth fight was really, really cool. It has that one wrinkle that I don't like as a raid leader of having to split the group into 2 different teams. But other than that, like, the mechanics are pretty good, and they mostly read pretty well. It's got some kind of unique little elements to it, which I like. And even though it's long, you're always doing something. You're always like killing something, and you're watching health bars go down, which feels really good, right? We've had some long fights where that doesn't really happen. So yeah, I walked away from it feeling like this was a fun fight to learn. It was a fun fight to do. I'm not dreading having to re-clear it for the next few months here. Or, we're not going to do normal for that much longer, but just the overall concept of the fight, like, first impression was strong. I think it's one of the better normal bosses I've done for like an end raid boss. It's one of the best end bosses they've done on normal mode for a really long time. It feels approachable. The mechanics are interactive. They're interesting, and it feels like it's fair. So I had a good time with it. And then we had like an hour left, so we went and looked at Dathia again. Dathia caught some nerfs since we had looked at it on Wednesday, and it nerfed a couple things specifically that were causing us wipes. So we were able to push Dathia down by 15 minutes before the end of raid and call it a little bit early on a Sunday night, which was awesome.
Must have felt good.
Yeah, 3 new bosses was great. I think Vault is really going well. Like, I'm having a good time in there. The fights are fun, and the tuning feels pretty good. I mean, Dathia was, I think, certainly an outlier, and needed to be touched up a little bit. It's also just a weird fight, so there's a lot of stuff going on that can really impact and have some unintended effects with like group size and stuff. So yeah, overall, raid has been super fun. I think Vault so far, I mean, I'm not done prog yet, obviously, but so far Vault feels way more in line with what I was hoping it would feel like, and not at all what I was fearing it might be like, right? Like, it feels like a great intro raid. It feels really rewarding and fun to do. So I'm having a great time in there.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, no, I haven't been paying as much attention this past week as the first week back to my job, which meant that it sort of ate up a lot more of my time. I actually was working overtime this week. Isn't it nice to come back, from vacation and then just immediately go into overtime? That's always nice.
That's not what you want, yeah.
But anyways, yeah, this the rating stuff seems to be going well for you, and I'm glad that you're enjoying it a lot. As far as, other stuff you wanted to touch on inside WoW, is there something else standing out for this?
Yeah, I mean, so Keystones last week was our first kind of real look at like big kid tyrannical keys, because the first tyrannical week we weren't going up much higher than 10s, 11s, maybe 12. So this week we're doing like 15, 16, 17s, which is starting to get into that upper echelon. I ended up doing 8 keys for the week, so I get my third choice. I think my lowest item level choice is at like 15, so it's pretty high. I got up over 2100 rating, so that's Keystone Master and then some extra points. So I didn't even realize. For some reason I had 2400 in my head, thinking probably of like 10 dungeon pools or like all 20s for portals. And so I did like a Halls of Valor, I think, which I had no score on. So we did like a 14 Halls of Valor and timed it, and I was like, oh, I guess I have Keystone Master done now. So that was awesome. That felt really good. Last week was mostly a pretty good tyrannical week, as we sort of alluded to on last week's show. I got to say that Ruby Life Pools and Azure Vaults still feel like sort of difficulty outliers. They just seem like a lot harder, especially on like tyrannical weeks, than most of the rest of the pool. Algathar Academy and Noku Defensive are feeling a bit better. They made some changes to both of those dungeons, and I think I timed like a 16 Nokud this week. I don't know. Nokud is it's a tough dungeon at first, but you seem to learn the particulars of some of the trash and stuff, and they have been working on bringing the bosses in line. Algathar has some real sticky points, but they have targeted a couple good nurses. One change we'll talk about a little bit later that helps immensely in there, so that feels good. And the older dungeons, like, yes, they certainly have their points that are dangerous, but they feel pretty approachable. So I think Ruby Life Pools and Azure Vault need a little bit more tuning attention, maybe, but also we have to learn the dungeons, right? And we have to learn how to face these different parts of them with different affixes and react to it appropriately. There's a little bit of give and take, but it's like, to some degree, it's WoW, right? Like, stand in this, don't stand in that, bait this over here, kill this. It's not like the bosses are reinventing the wheel in any way. So we're learning them, and those couple dungeons feel like a difficulty outliers compared to the rest of the field to me. But we have seen them touching stuff up a lot. It's not like they're just sitting there going, well, I don't know, maybe people will figure it out. Maybe they like this. Like, they're not doing that. So that's always a good sign.
Yeah, and I'm always pleased when it feels like they're actually paying attention to what the player base is wanting and are actually doing adjustments based off of that. When it comes to those outliers, I'm sure we'll see some sort of changes come in now that everyone's back to work. That's been kind of the big thing. Is this past week all the Blizz devs actually got back from their vacation and started working on things, and it seemed like the thing at the top of their agenda was class balance and making sure that the tuning sort of got worked out. So I imagine we'll see some tuning passes to dungeon content next week, and how that actually pulls over, maybe later this week. The other big factor that you mentioned in there was Mythic Plus affixes. We haven't seen the whole rotation yet when it comes to what these are doing. So we know that every week for them, when a new rotation comes out, they're analyzing that new rotation, processing the data that came from, what people's experiences were, reading forum posts, and then putting out adjustments, which is, again, why it's like probably a week or something we'll see them tweak, or before we actually see that combo again, we'll see them tweak it a bit when it comes to what Ruby Life Pools and whatnot feels like. So we'll see how all of that goes. But in general, this past week for me in WoW was just another, relaxing week of doing fishing and farming rep and hanging out and just playing on alt a little bit. Like, had a good time. So my week is less exciting than yours to talk about, but it's still a good time. It's just a little escape here and there. But yeah, my work schedule's just borked me of late. We had a guy go on leave, and so he's actually gone. He's just on extended medical leave kind of deal. And so we're down a person, which just means that we all work more. So
right, yeah,
that's what's been going on with me. All right, anyways, let's hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. All right, this week in World of Warcraft is the Pet Battle bonus event, meaning the Sign of the Critter buff is up, increasing your pet battle experience. Your pet experience gained by 100%, and of course there's a quest to win 5 PvP pet battles, which with a team of level 25 pets, which is a nice little added twist that they threw in there, to reward you with a ultimate pet battle training stone, which instantly trains any pet to level 25. I guess early in expansion, this is a little bit more exciting because there's people out there who are getting new pets. There's lots of new pets to capture, and leveling those pets up can take time. So the Sign of the Critter buff is a nice spicy thing to find because you're then able to essentially put together new teams that are more interesting. And I suppose those people who enjoy PvP pet battles will be like, hey, think of all the new combos and new crazy, affinities that we can put together for these different pets to try and make them very symbiotic and beat up my enemies. So, this is probably actually a pretty exciting time for Sign of the Critter buff to be out.
Yeah, it's like pretty much the best time, right? Like new expansion is like the best time, and then new patch is slightly behind there, and beyond that, the sheen comes off a little bit. But yeah, there's a lot of new pets right now, so you probably have a lot of pets you want to level up. So it's a good thing to take advantage of this week for sure.
Yeah.
And in my case, I probably won't be doing any of this, so it's just one thing I don't have to worry about, and I can do something else.
Yeah. On the Don't Miss It checklist for the week, we got Aiding the Accord, obviously, getting that 3K rep. The Siege of Dragonbane Keep, Community Feasts, the Shukar Hunting Grounds, your Primal Storms, which are a great way to gear up your characters. And so that's the weekly in Valdrakken, as well as the weekly quest item per elemental type that you can get. The Cobalt Assembly rep, Obsidian rep, where you have to choose which dragon friend you want to help. The weekly Profession and Artisans Consortium quests, if you're grabbing those. And then, of course, the dungeon quests, PvP quests that are up in Valdrakken as well. So grab those up, and you can take care of all those. The brawl for the week is Shadowpan Showdown, meaning that you basically step into Tiger's Peak Arena. And it's a race to see who can control the center point and activate the two bosses. And then, obviously, the first team to kill the other team's boss wins. So this is, your PvP, or PvEVP, whatever we want to talk about it.
PvPvE.
Yes, that could be that
or
too.
Or maybe PvEVP. I like PvPVE.
VE. Okay, sure. Whatever an acronym you want to use for it. It basically comes down to your team versus their team, and your team has one giant NPC boss on it, and their team has one giant NPC boss on it. Your team can heal your boss, it can damage your opponent's boss. You basically are attempting to protect yours and destroy theirs, and it's a good fun. I actually like this one a lot as a brawl, so check it out if you want to. Get yourself some Marks of Honor, Conquest, and some Honor points. Always worth checking out Shadowpan Showdown if you haven't yet. It's just a very unique brawl that's out there and fun to check out.
Yeah, this could almost be like its own mode, like they could do a bunch of different ones of these, with like maybe different bosses that do stuff or do different maps. Like it could just be like a different way to play the game maybe, but this one, it was also gone out of the rotation for a really long time, so it might be hard to make this work properly. I don't know. Might not be a thing they could really expand on too much. But yeah, it's definitely, this is a big change of pace from some of the other brawls and like your typical BG. So if that sounds cool, then definitely check it out this week.
Yeah. World boss this week is Bazrikon the Shalewing. This is the Earth Proto-Dragon in Waking Shores. And you want to be sure that you are getting out there and killing off the world boss for that 395 loot. You got plate chests, mail wrists, leather feet, cloth waist, and a mastery crit neck. So be sure you're taking out Bazrikon the Shalewing in the Waking Shores. Okay, Mythic Plus affixes for the week are Fortified, Spiteful, and Grievous. Meaning non-boss enemies have more health and inflict more damage. Fiends rise from the corpses of non-boss enemies and pursue random players. And injured players suffer increasing damage over time until healed. This is kind of gross. I'm just like, it's just a little gross. Fortified obviously means trash is going to take longer. Spiteful means that when you finally kill the extremely healthy trash that you're killing, more things rise from their corpses, which then take time to die, whether you're DPSing them or they just die over time, which means the trash then takes potentially even longer. And then Grievous just means things are more dangerous, right? So any kind of AoE effect that's going to go off, whether it's boss or, trash, your whole group is going to start suffering Grievous, and they have to be taught back up. So it's just, Grievous is just pressure on healers. But Fortified Spiteful is like, it's just pressure and trash. There's just a lot more to deal with as far as that goes. So to deal with Spiteful ads, you're either DPSing them down, or their health sort of rots over time. You can lock them down with things like Mass Entangle, or knock them back, or Frost Nova them, or whatever it is, to sort of just keep them away from your group and move past them, and just let them rot on their own. Just keep in mind that this will keep you locked in combat, which then creates a lot of other issues for classes like Rogues, who want to be able to stealth, and then can't stealth because they're locked in combat, or if you're trying to do a skip, or if you want to sit to eat food, or whatever it is that you're trying to do, you can't do those things while their Spiteful adds up. So that is a bit of a pain when it comes to that sort of thing. And then, Grievous is just pressure. So I think overall this is not something where it's like you have Grievous and Spiteful working together to sort of make things more symbiotic and being a pain in the butt for the week, but Fortified Spiteful just means trash is going to take a long time, which is not something we're looking forward to.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's going to be that way on a 4-week anyway, right? But Spiteful does bring it to kind of another level because you have essentially extra trash you have to deal with, right? Like, you don't have to kill this trash, but you have to react to it in some way. And a lot of times what ends up being time efficient anyway is just like cleaving the ghosts down and kiting them in circles while you're killing stuff that isn't dead yet and then running away from those last few ghosts or whatever. The good thing about Grievous is they did change it a while back so that direct heals remove a stack of the stacking bleed that you get from it. So that helps a lot because in the olden days of Grievous, it was like late in an expansion with a big enough health pool and a big enough discrepancy between your health pool and your healer's throughput. Like, you might not be able to remove Grievous without dying. So that was not great. So it works a little bit. There's more counterplay to it now, and self heals and all that help too. So if you have those kind of abilities, keep that in mind. Drop a self heal on yourself and remove a Grievous stack, and your healer will be thrilled.
I will say that the one symbiotic thing that I'm kind of nervous about is how Spiteful interacts with Thundering. People trying to run and try and get to their group and try and get rid of a debuff when you've killed the trash mob early and there's a Spiteful ad chasing them. And so now you suddenly have to deal with, hey, I want to move to this person, but there's a Spiteful ad between me and them, and if it hits me, it's going to do a ton of damage and potentially kill me, which then, of course, means that person can't clear their debuff for Thundering, which then means that they're going to get stunned. Like, there's that kind of, like, danger aspect to the whole thing, so I do think that'll be interesting to see how players deal with, but I think that's where Rooting and Frost Nova and whatnot can come in really handy, or just turning to focus down Spiteful ads as they pop up, one or the other.
Yeah, that's been one of the things that we've really had to pay attention to these first few weeks is Thundering interacting with other, non-seasonal affixes. And last week was not great for that. Storming was pretty disruptive. And normally Storming is like a big nothing for the most part. In this dungeon pool, there are some dungeons like Noku Defensive where a lot of stuff has tornado attacks. And you combine that with Thundering, and then you combine that with Storming, and suddenly there's 700 tornadoes on your screen, and you have to remember which ones are from where, and they look slightly different, but still you have to process all that information, and then you got that clock ticking in your head that you got to clear your Thundering debuff. And I definitely had situations this past week where the combination of affixes resulted in deaths, including my own. For example, like Ner'zhul boss in Shadowmoon Burial Grounds, right? He's got a ton of area denial already with the bone ritual. And then you can get Thundering and Storming while that's happening, and then you have nowhere to really go potentially, or at least nowhere safe to go. Quaking was kind of the same way, right? That was what we had the first week, and Quaking could really mess up your plans when you think you're going to go clear your debuff because it pops at the wrong time, and then you got to wait for it to go off or whatever, or hope you can get in and out fast enough. I think Spiteful definitely presents some challenge in that regard, although it should be better than something like Quaking or Storming, but it's definitely something we have to pay attention to, and it is going to, I think that's going to come into play every time we see an affix with some kind of area denial during Thundering season. You're gonna have to be aware of it. It's gonna affect the way that you play for sure. It's always a little bit weird to get used to the first rotation that we see it too. So, overall, I think this is an okay fortified week as long as your healer is confident in removing Grievous. Spiteful is annoying and it costs you a lot of time, but also in many of these dungeons, you have room to root them, knock them back, and then just proceed. And you probably don't have to spend a lot of time on them. You just want to position them in such a way that you can get away from them. And there are some tight hallways, but I think more often than not, you have room in most of these dungeons. And yeah, worst comes to worst, you can just stun them up and nuke them down and move on to the next thing. It shouldn't hold up too much scripted stuff in these dungeons that I can think of, but it's our first time seeing it, so maybe I'll run into something this week if I'm waiting on some kind of dungeon feature to unlock until my combat drops, then that stuff always got under my skin in Shadowlands. But, yeah. I mean, overall, this is just a very healer focused, healer punishing week, and if your healer is confident, then I think your group is going to be in good shape. Your tank does need to set you up for success with Spiteful, and DPS obviously needs to know not to let the Spiteful ghost smack them to death, but put on your cleave talents and just go to town. And I think it's a pretty good fort week. It's just like we always say, like, there's an upper limit where you're going to reach like the ceiling for your group, and it's going to punish you. But as long as your healer can handle Grievous, then you can do keys this week.
Yeah, it's not the worst fortified week that we've seen. There's certainly been much worse fortified weeks, so we'll see how this all plays out with Thundering. Like you said, as these new affix rotations come out, it's really about how they interact with Thundering, then players are going to have to adjust with that. So that's going to be the big factor for a lot of people. Well, we also have the Lunar Festival. It's kicking off on next Friday. It's going to be the 20th of January 20th of January that all of this is kicking off. And of course, the Call of the Scarab, that's going to be the January 21st. And both of these are, I would say, decent if you're not too busy with Dragonflight. Lunar Festival's,
yeah, pretty much.
Lunar Festival's great if you're trying to get some experience on an alt. Just going around to the different points and collecting the different tributes to for Lunar Festival. That's fantastic. Just all the different flight points and picking up all the little bags with the moonstones and whatnot on them.
Yeah, like the elder
honoring your elders.
Yeah.
And then Call of the Scarab. I think Horde won it last time. Is what happened with Call of the Scarab?
I think they did. Yeah. I think Alliance was on like a 3-year streak. And Horde broke it. In NA. I don't play in any other regions, but
that's what I remember too. So
yeah, I didn't look it up, but we'll talk about it a bit more next week. But keep in mind, that stuff is coming up. Yeah. There's no special events happening in game this week, but next week we got a couple overlapping.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind, and we'll chat about them then. With devs back in the studios and working away on things, of course, we got hot fixes that came through. Jason already talked about a couple of the raid ones that happened throughout the week, but the notable hot fixes for this week is in Valdrakken. There's Seth Relax now sells the Arboreal Distinguishment, which is 5 marks of honor for 2,000 honor, which means, hey, you want to convert your honor into transmog, you can convert your honor into transmog, and that's what I'm happy about. So that's always a nice thing to see when they add that in early on in the expansion, because it gives people something to do with it. There's nothing like hitting an honor cap and being like, well, what do I do with this? I guess I just buy the random crafting material bags or whatever it is and then try and sell them on the auction house. As opposed to being like, hey, no, I can actually buy Marks of Honor and get Transmog, which is something that I want to collect throughout the entire expansion, because all the previous expansions then rotate into the pool of being able to buy with Marks of Honor. So that's always nice to be able to do. So certainly something worth spending your honor on if that's something you want to do. As far as Dungeons and Raids go, they adjusted various arcane visuals in Court of Stars, Algathar's Academy, and the Arcane Vaults to be more visible. That's always a nice thing. Oh my goodness, especially in Court of Stars, from what I can recall, the amount of times I've been snaked by something that was inside of stairs or underneath of something has been super irritating in that place. So I certainly appreciate updates to visuals. Jason, do you get a chance to see any of this?
It seems like anytime you fight like bosses doing arcane attacks, you're always in like a purplish, bluish room, and then they're shooting purple magic at you. It can be kind of hard to see. I haven't actually done any of these dungeons since this change came through, but I saw a video of the change in Court of Stars, and it is striking how much more visible that mechanic is. This is good. Yeah, I mean, part of the thing, like artistically, with these arcane type of magic visuals is they want them to look kind of ethereal, right? Like it's magic. It's like literally magic. But that can have gameplay impacts when you can't see what you're supposed to be avoiding.
Yeah, no. As far as Algathar's Academy, Overgrown Ancient, they increased the amount of time between abilities and particle effects in the Burst Forth ability. So the combination of Germination and Burst Forth is the most dangerous part of the encounter. So they hope that by giving more space between this, players will be able to prepare for it and recover from it. This is the type of stuff that we're talking about, going through these bosses and actually going, hey, you know what? this doesn't feel right, and this didn't feel right last week, and now that we're back in the studio, let's be sure we get out ahead of this quickly and get these sorts of things resolved to give players time to enjoy these dungeons.
Yeah, this was the thing in Algathar Academy specifically that was just a killer. This is a backbreaker, especially as you were moving up the tyrannical ranks, because you have so many targets, right? And the idea here is you get 2 rounds of germination and then a burst forth, and then all of the stuff that was germinating turns into ads that throw a ton of poisons out, and it's a lot of pressure. They've mixed up the timing a bit here, and it feels really good. It's still hard. It's still probably one of the harder bosses in the pool overall, because of the amount of stuff going on. It's so much visual information to process, and it can be so punishing. But at least now you have time to set up your germinations, right? It's the little beige swirlies that follow you around. You stack everybody up, try to drop them nearby, each other's, and then the second wave, you try to drop nearby the existing ones. Then this gives you an extra little bit of time to position and start cleave and start, getting all of that damage rolling on the, I don't know what the little ads are called, but the stuff that spawns from burst forth. It helps you get ready for it and maybe kill some stuff off in advance. It's big. It's a big change, and it makes the boss overall feel much better. So really glad when this came in last week.
Yeah. They also went through Azure Vaults and made sure that Azure Blade got a little bit of a change. They increased the time it takes for Azure Blade to drain their mana. So just keep that in mind as well, giving you a little more time there.
Yeah, that's another fight that was like... this fight was so little uptime that you had on the boss. Because the boss is constantly like ping-ponging back and forth between like spawning ads that you then have to go address, and then moving to the center to recharge mana, which spawns a bunch of ads, and then there's a ton of stuff you got to avoid. I did Azure Vaults last night, I think, and this boss felt much better. They increased the time it takes to drain the mana by, I don't know, a third or something. It was a lot longer, a lot more uptime, so it felt much better. Believe it or not, like when we're fighting a boss, we want to fight the boss and attack and cast spells at the boss. So now you can do that a little bit more.
Yeah. Advisor Melandris over in Court of Stars. I'm always happy to see Advisor Melandris nerfs. They increase the unavoidable damage by Slicing Maelstrom by 20%, which makes me sad because that isn't a nerf. That's actually a buff, which sucks. But they reduce the additional damage of Slicing Maelstrom to players within 7 yards by 30%. So they're like, all right, the person who makes, who gets hit by this thing, who gets targeted by it and has to run out and drop the little swirly circle on the ground is going to take a bigger hit. But if someone else gets clipped by it, they don't get wrecked. So that's nice. They also improve the visual clarity of Piercing Gale, which is huge because that entire room is like, I'm going to cast translucent spells on a floor that is this beige color, and it's not fun.
You fight in like a grayish purplish arena, and then there's like
grayish purplish abilities.
Gray dust clouds over the floor.
Yeah,
they stand out a lot more. They're much darker purple now, so that should help. And it seems like the thing with Slicing Maelstrom is that it just wasn't working properly. So it was doing it's supposed to have that 7-yard fall off damage, and that was just hitting too hard. So they fixed that, which meant that then it wasn't hitting hard enough outside of that 7-yard range. So this just kind of normalizes it so it scales a bit better. But I mean, I did this after these changes into the tuning, not before the visual clarity change, but the boss felt way better. As long as people move away from the images for Slicing Maelstrom, then it felt pretty manageable last week, even with a tyrannical week where the boss is doing a lot more damage and is alive a lot longer. And this fight has ramp up. The longer you're in the fight, the more Slicing Maelstroms you're going to get. So this is a good change. I think it makes the boss way more approachable. And Court of Stars is a dungeon that feels pretty good, but Melandris is always the thing that you're kind of sweating a little bit. You're like, okay, we can time this as long as we don't have a disaster on Melandris. And I feel like it was way more of a coin flip before as to whether or not you were going to have a disaster on Melandris. These changes should help a lot.
Yeah. Nokud Offensive got a big old nerf bat smack to it when it comes to the Raging Tempest. They were apparently nerfing the damage of Surge of Power to compensate for fixing an issue that was causing Surge of Power damage to not scale with Keystone level. So they reduced Surge of Power damage by 80%.
Right. It scales now, but like you probably got to go up pretty high before it starts hurting worse than it was before. This was a pretty scary boss the first couple of weeks. They've reined it in a lot, and some of it is stuff like this where it's just behaving improperly and they have to adjust the behavior. So a lot of changes to this boss so far, and I think warranted because it's just such a punishing fight for your healer. The size of the arena and the way the boss mechanics make you spread out even farther than you need to based on the arena, and the kind of persistent damage that the boss is able to put out on the party. It's a big test, and it's the type of boss that you can sort of understand why the tuning maybe wasn't right out the gate, right? Like, again, you don't want to have these bosses come in too easy. Because you can't like significantly buff them once they're out in the wild, right? Like that just doesn't feel fair, especially for dungeons. So I think Raging Tempest is one they came in a little too hot with, but they've been pretty good about walking stuff back and making it feel like a boss you can actually approach and down.
Yeah. They also, you might notice that the Knucklehead Lance Masters are now less talkative during the Ballista Fire. So it's just one of those like, listen, someone's got them in line. They gave them a talking to about being, distracted during work. They need to actually focus on what they're doing.
Yeah, those lines would play a lot. And I did no-cood last night. I didn't happen to notice, but maybe I was just paying so much attention to what I was doing in the game. That's why I was in the zone. I wasn't listening to the dialogue. The dialogue.
Yeah. Ruby Life Pools saw themselves some nerfs as well. Just keeping that in mind, they reduced especially the absorb value of Ice Bulwark on Meladrusa Chillworn by 25%, as well as they reduced the party-wide periodic damage of Chillstorm by 33%. So just going through, getting some things more in line. Glad to see it. Jason's been, chatting for a little bit about Ruby Life Pools and how it's been a problem with his Keystone stuff he's been doing. So it makes sense that they've sort of are listening to player feedback and adjusting things like this. So you aren't dealing with that. There's a lot of also the other fix that we're seeing a bunch of is them figuring out, oh, hey, bosses are doing damage to pets. And so we need to actually stop that from happening too much. And so a lot of bosses in a lot of dungeons have been getting tuning fixes and passes to make sure that they aren't killing players' pets all of the time. So that's good to see too.
Yeah, specifically like in here, it's like the breath attacks from the two big dragons up top, like which are very punishing and huge attacks. They were killing pets, I guess, which they shouldn't be doing because you can't really control if your pet is caught in a breath. So that's good. They're still very dangerous mobs, but at least it feels more fair. I think Meladrusa still needs to get touched up a little bit. She's an extremely punishing, like tyrannical boss for the first boss of a 3-boss dungeon. She's like just brutally hard. She's got what feels like probably too much health, and she just beats you up with. I mean, Chillstorm is, even after the nerf, I felt like Chillstorm was still pretty bad. So, yeah, RLP still feels like probably the hardest dungeon. It's kind of a toss-up. I guess it depends on your group makeup and comp, but RLP is tough. I think it still needs a little bit of work to be in line with some of these other dungeons.
Yeah, I don't know. It's nice to see the changes coming in, and I hope they sort of continue doing them. Something that they did change for Temple of the Jade Serpent that I love seeing. These are the type of changes that I think are really fun. The Lesser Shaw and Malformed Shaw's ability Shaw Eruption no longer ignores line of sight, which means you can actually line of sight it, which to me is always a really great option to add to the game for players because it adds in counterplay, and counterplay is just really fun to be able to figure out and do. So knowing that, hey, the Shaw Eruption's coming, I can line of sight this and not take damage from it, is just a nice thing to allow players to be able to do. I've always hated when there's like a pillar or a rock or a flag or some sort of crafting table or something that's out in the middle of a fight, and you sort of crouch down behind it or get in behind it to try and get cover from whatever's about to happen, and then the bolt just goes right through it or hits you, or they just keep attacking you with ranged attacks through it. You keep getting hit by arrows, whatever it is. That's always irritating to me because it's like I'm behind a rock. Like, come on, yes, but the rock isn't real. I don't like.
It's not a terrain rock.
Exactly.
Like it's a rock that you see, but it's not part of the terrain. Yeah, that's not fair.
So I like when they add in counterplay that you can use, the environment around you to be able to take advantage of that, particularly in dungeons because the environment's really well designed. There's lots of stuff in there, so when you can do that, it's great to see the counterplay come in. All right, Vault of the Wardens, Vault of the Incarnates, Vault of the Incarnates. Taros, they gave it a little LFR nerf, that Rock Blast by 44% on LFR, so if you were finding you were getting shreked by that has been taken down some notches, so no one has to worry about that anymore. Concussive Mark had some harsh overlaps with other spells, so these casts are getting pushed back by 2 to 3 seconds depending on the difficulty to keep an exciting challenge, but one that feels fair and expected for the position of this fight in the raid. I'm curious if what they say is depending on difficulty, that they aren't screwing with Mythic timers, because that is one of the number one things that frustrates Mythic raiders, is when you get your rhythms and everything all figured out for everything, and then they shift everything by 2 to 3 seconds, and suddenly it changes all of your timings for how you're doing this boss. If it does shift the Mythic ones, the one benefit to this is Primal Council's fairly early on inside the raid, which means that by the time most Mythic teams get back to killing Primal Council a second time or a third time, whatever it is they're doing, they've now geared enough that all their timers for all the things they're doing have shifted already, so they have to redo this anyways. So it's not a huge deal as far as that goes, but I do like that they're looking at particularly overlaps inside fights. It's not something they look at that often when it comes to changes that we see. We mostly see nerfs to ability damage, but we don't often see, hey, you know what, we're actually going to change the tempo of this fight by spacing these spells out by a bit because we find these overlaps to be a little bit too harsh. So I like seeing that. That's going to be a good one.
Yeah, I haven't done this since this change came in. And Primal Council is a trickier fight for my group because it's so melee heavy. And so Conductive Mark obviously spreads to other players when you touch them with it. And if you have a giant melee stack, then people are touching each other with Conductive Mark quite frequently. One thing about the timing, the way this worked before is, I forget what the spell cast is, but you get the pillars, right, that you have to clear Conductive Mark on. And the way it was working out for us typically was Conductive Mark would go out, and then we'd have somewhere between like 5 and 8 seconds until a new cast of pillars would go out. So what I would tell people would be, okay, if you have Conductive Mark, like if you can clear it, if you're near pillars, go ahead and clear it and then get back in the group. If you can't safely go clear on a pillar, then don't panic. Just stand still and wait that 5 seconds or whatever for the next cast and then clear on the new pillars. This should make it so that kind of downtime and that weird holding pattern that you're in is now a lot shorter. Now it should only be maybe, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, whatever, somewhere in that neighborhood that you're waiting for the pillars to pop up to then be able to clear and reposition. So haven't tried it yet since the change came in, but it did feel it, like I will say, like on Heroic, it felt like just a weird bit of downtime. Like Conductive Mark was too close to whatever the preceding cast was, but it wasn't close enough to the next pillars. So I guess I'll check it out tomorrow and see if it feels any better. I would like it if it was like 2 seconds of Conductive Marked melee standing out and trying to be careful and waiting versus 5 seconds or something.
Right. No. As far as Dathia goes, they reduced the Thunderbolt's damage by 33% on Heroic. They reduced Thundercaller's health on lower group sizes on Heroic. These are the things I like to see. Reduce Cyclone's damage on lower group sizes on Heroic, because the biggest issue that I've been complaining about since, Warlords of Draenor was group size scaling has always been a problem for Blizzard. It always has been. When they design their fights, they design them for 20 people. That's what they design them for. It's all designed for Mythic content. And you end up with encounters where, you actually have 14 people, or you have, 28 people inside of your raid. You suddenly end up with the room not being designed for it. The abilities not being designed for it. There's either so many interrupts that your group is so small they can't actually catch all of them effectively, and so you're just dealing with really bad overlaps and really bad, damage waves coming in that you just can't actually stay on top of because you don't have enough players to actually deal with it. And by players, I mean classes that have short interrupts, right? The issue with having a smaller group size is you end up with a lot less variety of classes that are in the raid, which might mean, hey, you know what, if you're running 3 mages and a hunter and, you know, a boomkin as like your DPS squad inside of your raid team, you're not going to have a ton of interrupts if your, you know, next group of healers are not ones who are running interrupts at that time. And now I guess with the ability to actually spec into interrupts, you can actually, you know, as a lot of the healing classes, you can actually have them help out with it. But in previous days of raiding, that wasn't the case. So if you didn't have a shaman, you didn't have an interrupt as far as a healer goes. So it's just one of those like moments to me, I guess, where I'm glad to see these changes continuing to happen as based off group size, because it's such an important factor for making the game fun for players, is that these encounters are designed to work well between 10 players and 30 players. That's what they have to fit in the fun range for that group. And if they don't, then you need to make changes for how group scaling is happening, because it's just a problem.
Yeah, and we saw them change this fight a couple weeks ago in terms of larger group sizes, because they made this fight also has like conductive mark. I don't know if it's called the exact same thing off the top of my head, but similar mechanic, and that was scaling with group size, so it would go out on way too many people to keep it under control, and they changed that to be 4 targets. 4 people get it regardless of your group size, which is much more manageable. So some changes this week to kind of bring it more in line for smaller group sizes, which is probably good. I mean, I did it with 21 or 2 last night, so I'm going to guess that probably doesn't count as a lower group size on heroic difficulty. But I will say that the Thunderbolt damage getting reduced by 33% across the board on heroic was huge. This is the thing you have to pay attention to when the ads are up on the upper platforms. So just reducing that by that much baseline gave us a much bigger window to survive the damage and keep doing what we wanted to do. So that was really cool. And also the volatile infusers not casting unstable gusts at low health on heroic and below. That was an exact thing that we wiped to a couple times on Wednesday, is because unstable gusts are the like bright white swirly area denial things that the ads spawn. And you know, this is a hectic fight in terms of positioning. You're trying to drag the infuser out to the edge so you can get like knocked away from it onto the platform. And you have well, they're not called cyclones. That's a different ability, but you have these tornadoes spinning around the platform that are displacing you. So you got to position away from them, but still in line with the platform you're trying to get to. And then if you have the unstable gust coming out right as you're about to get knocked up on top of the platform, you know, you can end up getting displaced out of being able to do that, fall off the edge and die. That's no fun. And also the Zephyr Slam nerf was huge, which is the thing that hits the tank. The knockback distance being reduced by 40%. You know, when we first started doing this, my co-tank being a paladin, he doesn't have charge, he doesn't have leap, he doesn't have a way to just snap back to the boss. And when we were learning it on normal, we were doing some really wacky stuff of just like me basically solo tanking the boss, because I could just charge back every time and it wasn't hurting me that bad. Not really a viable strategy for heroic and above. So you need to have you know, a way on, at least on heroic, I think, for any tank class to be able to survive Zephyr Slam 3 stacks without, you know, having to rely on cheeses or movement abilities in order to do that. So these nerfs helped a lot. I don't think I mean, our kill was pretty good, but I don't think we would have killed it this past week without those nerfs coming in. It helped us just get farther into the fight and learn more about it, you know, and I feel like we have a much better plan for how to handle certain mechanics going forward after looking at it, you know, post-nerf. So glad to see these come in. I do think Dathea was a difficulty outlier among the first 6-7 bosses. Like, she was being killed much less frequently than Kurog. And I don't think that should be the case, considering you can kind of choose either boss's wing. After these nerfs came in, I think, which was late Wednesday or Thursday, her kill rate on WoW Progress for heroic shot up like 4 percentage points, which is like a 20% increase in groups killing her. So I think they got a bit closer with the tuning after that.
Yeah, it's so clear and evident when something needs a nerf based off of the amount of kill percentage that players are getting. That's why I bring it up so much when we're talking about last bosses of raid tiers. Looking at like Sylvanas kills versus like, you know, when you're looking at Crucible, when you're looking at any of these raid tiers where people really struggle to actually kill the final boss, And you go, okay, well, previous tier it was this many teams, this tier it was this many teams, and this tier it was that many teams. And you look at the 3 different raids and you go, well, why was it that this end boss died, 40% or 60% less during this raid tier than these other raid tiers, right? And it speaks to a lot of not necessarily what's going on for the players, but what's going on for the difficulty of the raid. Because you can then, of course, track that timing out with how many weeks into that raid were they before the bosses even started to die, and how many weeks into the raid were they when this many bosses had died versus that many bosses had died. So it's super interesting to see the analytics of the whole thing, because it's just so clear. Like, the evidence is just there, which I love to see. So glad they're getting in there and nerfing this stuff. There were some Kura Grim Totem fixes. One of them was that the intermissions enemies' presence abilities were able to pierce magic immunity. Yeah, that's not great. If you're spell bopping someone, then they should be spell bopped and not just get wrecked. And the damage from the elemental enemy's presence abilities during Kurog's intermission now respect avoidance. I don't understand why they would never ever make stuff not actually respect avoidance. It means that Kurog's dominance abilities that were respecting it then become really weird, because you're like, okay, well, some of these things respect this mechanic that they put into the game for a reason, and other ones don't. So I'm glad that they resolved that, because when you're supposed to take 15 or 20% less damage from everything, you should be taking 15 or 20% less damage from AoE stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, these are minor changes, but I think they just make the fight feel more fair. It's kind of weird that, like, the ads would be more dangerous with their presence abilities than the boss would, right? Like, that just logically doesn't make any sense. And if the intention is that, well, that's how Kurog's abilities work, then just kind of follows that the ad should work the same way. Not like huge changes here, but some of the intermission elementals abilities hurt pretty bad. So having different ways to maybe cheese them out, or like save your life if you make a mistake, that could be the difference between getting through that phase and wiping, right? So that's cool. I'm glad they did it.
Yeah. Thundering over in Mythic Plus got a visual update to make it a little bit easier to tell what's going on. It also got the quaking fix that we complained about for so long, where Thundering should no longer interrupt eating and drinking, which is great. I always like it when I don't feel like, my whatever affix inside the raid is going to, or inside the Mythic Plus dungeon is going to make me miss out on a food buff, especially when food feels like it's expensive to actually have and use regularly, or just interrupt like drinking in general for healers trying to gain mana back. So I'm glad that's a thing. I could be sitting drinking as a Resto Druid and call a friend over to clear their debuff on me while I sit there and drink. That's always a nice thing to do. So I'm certainly happy to see that change come in. With Halls of Valor.
Yeah, it's just obnoxious. Like, there's nothing you can do about it, right? Like, when Thundering goes off, it's off. Like, if you were eating, I'm glad they changed it. It shouldn't work that way. I don't know if that was intentional or just an oversight, but anyway, feel free to eat, drink, whatever when you're out of combat in Mythic Plus now.
Halls of Valor, players teleporting to the fields of the Eternal Hunt are no longer affected by quaking. I always hate that when everyone's all grouped up into a ball and then quaking goes off and kills everyone because they had to take a transportation thing, which means that the best way to play the game is to run up to where the transportation thing is and wait for a quaking, and then once it's happened, then take the transportation. That's just dumb. So I'm very glad that they got in and fixed this thing right away. Makes me super happy. As far as Odin goes, players pulled by Radiant Tempest are no longer affected by quaking. That's another big one. Hey, this boss has an attack that you cannot control when it happens that yoinks everyone together. Let's just make sure quaking doesn't happen during that, because that always sucks to wipe in a key too. Like, you can't really control when the boss is going to do it, so come on now.
Yeah, it's just some of this stuff is like, it's weird because quaking existed in Legion, right? Like, we had it in, like, I'm thinking of the teleporting thing specifically, right? And the other stuff that moves you around in Halls of Valor. Like, Halls of Valor was a Legion Keystone dungeon. Quaking, I believe, was in the pool. So did we just put up with that for 2 years and we get exploded upon when we were teleporting or something? I don't really remember at this point, but anyway, if you're having problems with that, you know, next time quaking rolls around, you'll be a bit safer. I'm sure there'll be little edge cases like that we find more of as we move through this season.
We did not have quaking back in Legion. We had Raging, Sanguine, Teeming.
Oh, really?
Decay, Necrotic, Skittish, and Volcanic. That's what we had.
Wow. That's funny. Quaking feels like it was an original Dungeon FX, doesn't it? It
feels like an old school one for sure, but I'm pretty sure it came in with BFA because we had Decay, which is all players suffer damage over time while the challenge is active. So just like everyone just takes damage steadily throughout the dungeon. We had Teaming, which was additional non-boss enemies are present through the dungeon, which require a kill count. Like the kill count requirement is increased based off of having the additional enemies. So like you had to kill more trash was like the thing with Teaming, right? And then Skittish was around back then, where tanks generated less threat. Like those are the three that sort of got rotated out, right? So
yeah, I don't miss those. I don't think really.
No.
I don't think we're good without them.
Yeah, I think we're good without those ones. All right, item rewards. They sort of went through and obviously touched up and fixed up some things, but they slightly increased the amount of Primal Chaos gained from the Victorious Contenders Strongbox at all ranks, but particularly at lower ones to help make it easier to earn enough of the Embellished PvP crafted gear. So it's nice to see them making that a bit easier for folks at the lower levels, which is good. They fixed an issue where Bookkeeper's Promise would snapshot the caster's versatility for the full buff's duration when calculating the heal. Yeah, this is the stuff where we see people playing around with brokenness, right? Where they're like, all right, I'm going to use everything that I have that can boost my versatility up, then use Bookkeeper's Promise, which snapshots that ginormous freaking number, and it's useful for the entire thing calculating the heal. Like that's the type of stuff that they get in and fix once they realize what players are doing with it, because it makes stuff really broken.
It's also like a design thing they purposely moved away from over the years, right? That kind of snapshotting stuff was big like years and years ago, and they've sort of moved away from encouraging that kind of behavior. So it makes sense that they would change something like that to me. Like that's consistent with the way they've designed combat over the years.
Yeah, they moved away from it because of niche situations where players would be using all sorts of bizarro abilities to try and take massive advantage of a snapshotting that's taking place. There was certainly a lot of skill involved in doing it, but I also feel that, again, WoW is a game to me that already has too many tips and tricks, teeny little tiny great ways to break the game in a sense for your character to do lots of damage. I feel like the ways to do your rotation properly needs to be very evident for the majority of the player base. And currently it feels like only 5% of the player base actually know the tips and tricks of how to do your rotation totally correctly in every way. And, one of those things I talk about with that is using Nature's Swiftness as a Resto Druid before casting Convoke, because it makes every single regrowth within the Convoke critically heal. That to me is one of those like Nature's Swiftness affects the entirety of Convoke and it isn't consumed during Convoke. Like that is one of those cases where people aren't going to figure that out on their own very often. There'll be very few people who actually figure that out without sitting down, doing the math and sorting that through. It should be more evident. Things like that shouldn't be niche case scenarios that exist. The game should be designed easier to play well, like at that decent 80th percentile, 70th percentile well, the game should be easier to play. So I'm glad to see them going through and fixing stuff like this.
Yeah, it's tough because you want to have vectors for people to show their skill, right? And you want to have ways for people to excel at a rotation or excel in a situation. But you also don't want people to be, punished greatly because of some edge case thing like that they're not taking advantage of. So it's tough. I mean, that's got to be a challenge that they face when it comes to, class design, spec design, balance, is having those little windows and those little situations where a savvy player, a really exceptional player, can take advantage of some combination like that and just like spike their throughput. But also, like, you want that pick up and play factor to be there, and you want people to be able to like, you should be able to pick up a spec and practice with it and go do like LFR and normal raid and feel like you're having a good time, right? Without having to know the intricacy of every part of the spec. That's got to be like one of the toughest things to design, is like, how do you build in these moments that people can take advantage of without punishing people who aren't savvy enough to know that they're there, or whatever, whatever the case may be, people who are just not playing at that level, or they're like not that familiar with the spec. Like, you want it to feel fun across the board, but you do need to have that, that skill ceiling in specs. And
I think
I don't envy it. I don't envy their job. I'll say that.
no, I think a lot of it comes down to finding better ways to describe those edge cases where you can take advantage of things like that in game. Right now, it's, the amount of times you read a tooltip and you're like, oh, okay, this makes this ability stronger, but it also does, whatever this word means. And I don't really know what that word means necessarily, because it refers to another ability, and that other ability is kind of vague. Like, there's a lot of times where that kind of situation happens, and it takes someone actually sciencing out and figuring it out, which, yes, there's an argument for, hey, it's neat to explore and try things and figure out those aspects of your class. But if you're just more straightforward with how abilities interact with each other and what that rotation should look like in game, as opposed to relying on Wowhead and all these other outside guide sites to actually allow players to, I guess, excel at their class in a big way, I feel like you are helping, you're lifting everyone up, right? You're raising everyone up by doing that, as opposed to being like, no, we'll just let them handle all of this. We'll still put in tooltips that are fairly basic tooltips as to what's going on with an ability. It's up to everyone else to sort of piece together how this might create a niche or edge case sort of situation, similar to the nature swiftness thing I talked about, right? Like, hey, like that was something someone stumbled upon and discovered because they were playing around with something, and it went up onto a guide site somewhere, and then that sort of got spread around to the community who actually paid attention to that sort of thing. But if they just threw on the tooltip for nature swiftness that this affects, all future things, or this specifically could affect Convoke or whatever it is, everyone would be like, oh, let me try that and see what happens with it, right? Like, I like the idea of making things more transparent for the player base, because the more we can require people to not go to sites like Warcraft Logs and Wowhead and everything else to try and learn how to do their rotation properly, the more fun everyone else is going to have with the game, because they're going to be playing with more people who actually understand the rotations better. So, yeah. Anyways, moving on from that, that was a little rant in the middle of the hot fixes.
Bottom line here is a bunch of raid trinkets got buffed, and they're better than they used to be, and a couple of them are a lot better. So check that out. I mean, I don't have much personal experience with any of these trinkets, so I don't know. But I do know that the Spiteful Storm buffs ended up being a bit of a game changer for a buddy of mine who was using the Spiteful Storm trinket, or had it in his inventory and it wasn't simming very well, and then it became a thing he wanted to use. So if you're like, oh, I got this trinket from Raid, I don't think it's very good, I don't know, it might have gotten buffed. So resim it, check it out, and go from there.
No. They also did a lot of profession tuning stuff, and many of the professions' weekly quests have had their quest drop rates increased, so making that easier to do, and making a lot of the quests had a little bit of tuning done. So if you're a particular profession, whether you're alchemy, enchanting, herbalism, jewel crafting, or mining, be sure you check out the notes to figure out exactly what changed for you and how it affects you. But there's little fixes that went through with the professions as well. As far as quests go, the Valdrakken multiple issues, they went through and fixed the Ruby Feast quest line. They were blocking players from advancing to the next quest. So if you're someone who sort of got stuck in the Ruby Feast quest line, you can now actually get in and finish that up. So that's another big change in there. All right, Jason, Solo Shuffle. This is as of January 6th that this post went up. There was a whole bunch of stuff that is coming in with weekly resets tomorrow. So basically they are going to be going through and updating so that leaving a match will both affect matchmaking rating and current rating. They currently have a great deal of player feedback indicating that losing only current rating has not been enough of a deterrent to leaving, and leaving is disruptive to Solo Shuffle experience. So yeah, this is the big factor. Jason, you want to talk for a second about this? This is the big change from player feedback. Yeah,
and this is happening like shortly after you'll be listening to this. Maybe this is not what they announced some stuff they were going to do in the patch, but this is happening right away. Is that leaving a match impacts matchmaking rating and current rating, like as of weekly restarts in your region this week. So this is great because, a leaver in Solo Shuffle is super disruptive and it wastes everybody's time and it sucks. So they want people to be disincentivized from doing that. They're going to punish leavers more harshly, and that's going to hopefully better preserve the time investment for the people who are playing fair and playing by the rules. So it's good to see it. I mean, it's something I've heard a bit of complaining about. It's like, people leave and then I just wasted my time because I don't get any rating or anything. And, I don't want to I queued up for a reason, right? Like I wanted to do the matches. So yeah, good to see this come through, and good to see that they could push some kind of change to it before the patch, because we'll be waiting a few weeks still for the patch at least. So yeah, hopefully you'll see a lot. Hopefully this will cut into the levers in the queues like right away.
Yeah, so things coming up with 10.0.5, because they wanted to really highlight some of this. This is the stuff that's coming up later. Is that rating will be calculated per round in games with levers. So just, keeping that in mind. This has been a recurring issue, and the feedback they'll agree with. The format of solo shuffles intended to have all 6 rounds completed, and as there will be composition or skill imbalances between individual rounds. Now when rating is calculated for incomplete matches with levers, gains and losses will be scaled linearly based on the number of rounds completed. So if you're someone who is experiencing a lever, you're going to get more benefit now when that person leaves than you did previously. That's something coming up in 10.0.5. Also, matchmaking value for each player in a match will be displayed on the scoreboard, which means, hey, it's easier to know whether you've queued in with, someone who is quite skilled at doing solo shuffle versus someone who's not, and gives you a better expectation of what to expect from those players on your team or who are rotating through your team, which is great to see. And there's a warning prompt that will now display penalties for leaving if a player attempts to leave a match. So there's now, hey, if you're trying to leave a match, you actually get that, are you sure you want to leave? Hit accept to, leave. Warning, in case people are, happen to right click on the wrong thing by accident or whatever it is. They actually have that moment to go, ooh, oops, sorry. And they also have it thrown in their face of, here's the penalty if you're going to do it. Guess what's going to happen? Which I think is good for players who do that. And they also highlight that players who leave excessively will be subject to account review and suspensions, as abandoning matches repeatedly is a violation in terms of service via exploiting functionality to the detriment of the game environment and the intended player experience. So, hey, guess what? It's actionable. That's what's going to happen. You keep leaving matches, they're actually going to start taking action against your account if you keep doing it. So it's solo shuffle's not something they're playing around with very much. Just be aware of that. Because it's going to be some serious that's like taking action against your account. It's like a serious level of experience for players.
Yeah, I mean that's a very stiff penalty, right? Getting maybe an account suspension or something from leaving matches. But I don't know. I don't know if I would say that that's unfair, right? Like if you're having net problems and your net's dropping, and so you left because you got DC'd, that's one thing. Maybe don't queue up more solo shuffles that day if you're having issues with your net, right? Like that sucks, but you're ruining the experience for the 5 other people that you're queuing in with. So maybe that's the fair thing to do, right? Like just kind of it's the reality of playing a game on a network, a service game like WoW is. So I think it's important for the integrity of the mode to punish levers. You can't really have levers or else the whole mode doesn't really function. I guess you could say that about any match-made activity in WoW, but I feel like solo shuffle is kind of uniquely positioned to be really punishing to the other participants if you have one lever. So, yeah, I don't know. I haven't done this too much. I have a couple friends who've gotten really into solo shuffle since it came in, and even more so since the rated mode has come in. And they seem to be having a good time with it. Like I don't really hear a lot of complaints about it, although the complaints that I do hear tend to revolve around levers. So I don't have much experience with it myself, but that's what I hear about it.
Yeah, I mean, what it comes down to is when one person leaves solo shuffle, it shuts down that round, right? Like it's not like inside an arena where one person leaves and the other 2 are at a detriment, and that sucks. But that person has a chance to come back and they can potentially like rejoin the match. There's things that can happen in some situations. In solo shuffle, it's just like, no, it's over. That's it. So yeah, it should be punishable. I'm glad it is. They do talk about the future a little bit, that they're looking forward to potentially incentivizing healers to queue into solo shuffle more often to reduce queue times, since there's so many people who queue for DPS roles. That's great. I love the idea of having reward bags or something like that for queuing up for in-demand activities like that. They also say they're looking to improving UI further for both those in queue and those who are about to queue. So I'm curious as to what that really means. It could mean that it's easier to tell what wait times are going to be. It's easier to tell, what you're going to be doing role-wise. I don't know. I'm curious about UI improvements for those who are in queue and those who are about to queue. Maybe that means about to queue means about to join a queue. Maybe that's what they were going for with that, which could be helpful. But as a team, they're overall excited for Raid Solo Shuffle stuff. So I'm glad to hear that it's a lot of excitement going with the team, and they're looking forward to the future for doing things. Okay, class tuning. Man, oh man. This is class tuning coming in for January 10th, so that's tomorrow. This is stuff that's going to be happening tomorrow. They basically, have been going through, looking at the content and what classes have been doing, and what we're seeing happen here is Vengeance buffs, Feral Druid buffs, Devastation for Evoker buffs, Survival Hunter buffs, Fire Mage and Frost Mage buffs, Brewmaster buffs, Mistweaver buffs, and Paladin getting some extra touches when it comes to Retribution. Some big buffs. Some of Retribution's main rotation buttons do not feel as good as I'd like them to. Additionally, their survivability isn't where they'd want it to be, so they're making some improvements to the defensive kit as well. So they're looking at Retribution as a whole and what they can sort of do with it more in the future. As far as priests go, you got Holy buffs and Shadow getting some big buffs. The changes are aimed at improving Shadow's single target DPS. The change to Focused Will is a targeted change for PvP to reduce Shadow's survivability. So a little bit of nerf to PvP survivability, but also some big buffs to their damage. Outlaw Rogues got themselves a small little nerf. Basically, as they're monitoring M+, they discovered that Outlaw is overperforming, which is not surprising. Rogues tend to have at least one of their specs that's overperforming at any given time, and they expect this change will reduce Outlaw's damage output in encounters with targets above 1 and below 8, as their damage is currently more consistent than they intended for dungeons and encounters that frequently present those circumstances. Warlock's Afflictions got some big buffs, and Destruction got some big buffs. So if you're any of the classes we listed with buffs, be sure you get in there and check. It's, great to see the class tuning waves happening. It seems like, as much as the quote-unquote race is done, it's still nice to see that they are actively doing these changes and trying to get everyone feeling like they're playing a good class. They weren't doing a lot of nerfs to try and bring stuff down in line, with the exception of that Outlaw stuff. They're just trying to raise everyone else up to feel like they're relevant, which is what we like to see.
Yeah, and the Outlaw nerf was pretty small. Like, it will definitely have impacts in the cases that they sort of mentioned, but it wasn't like Outlaw got obliterated. It's a relatively small nerf compared to the size of the buffs that a lot of these classes are getting. It's pretty negligible in my opinion. I'm not an Outlaw main, so I'm sorry, Outlaw mains, if you're upset about this. One thing that I love here is that I've been kind of waiting for the big round of Prot Warrior nerfs since like mid beta, and it just really has never come. Like, Prot Warrior has been nerfed a couple times, but not substantially, not in a way that really impacts anything you do with the class or like the class's overall power level in terms of, kit and everything like that. What we are seeing here is big buffs to Vengeance Demon Hunter and Brewmaster Monk, and that's really cool. Because I think we are in a spot with the overall tank meta where we need to bring up the survivability and tankiness of a couple tank specs instead of, hammering on the one spec that actually feels strong defensively. So, yeah, this is awesome. I can't wait to check out these monk changes because they seem really good for Brewmaster. It's a huge buff to Celestial Brew, which is your big damage absorbing brew, which is going from a 60-second CD baseline to a 45-second CD baseline. That's just massive. It represents a massive amount of extra damage mitigation for a Brewmaster Monk in combat. I haven't really had a chance to take my Brewmaster out yet for any kind of raiding or anything like that, but I'm still, slowly gearing him up. But it's cool that once I start getting into that stuff, that these changes will be in and be feeling stronger even out of the gate. So yeah, this is awesome. And I think this also obviously represents essentially nerfs to a lot of different types of PvE content, right? Like you put this much more power in players' hands, and that means that, if you've been playing, a lot of people have switched off of some of these specs because they've been underperforming, but if it's somebody's comfort zone, then they're going to play better. And if somebody's been, toughing it out with kind of an undertuned spec, then they're going to get a big reward for it. So it's cool to see.
Yeah, I just love to see that they aren't, as you talked about with tank classes that have a lot of survivability, bringing those ones down at all. They're just bringing others up. This is one of those times where a lot of those normal and heroic teams, and even a lot of mythic teams, are still progressing on bosses. And to have your class suddenly be weaker when you log in the next week, when it comes to like survivability, and when your role is survivability, feels very bad. So I'm glad they
it could be like jarring. Yeah, it could make you have to redo strats and stuff. Like, it's best to avoid that if possible.
Agreed. Yeah. So in 10.0.5, we had a couple other little dev notes that they threw in. The Mage Tower is going to be up for testing. So if you're someone who's hopping on PTR, you're going to be able to actually test the Mage Tower again, back in the new one that was out during last expansion, the revamped Legion 1 Mage Tower. There's not like a new one happening with Dragonflight. There isn't like a new Mage Tower. That wasn't on the agenda for this year when they released that, and I'm sure it would have been highlighted if it was. So keep that in mind. But yeah, if you're someone who's been missing out on Mage Tower stuff, that's coming back. So we'll see that in 10.0.5. Professions. All professions have had the requirement to unlock specializations reduced. Professions with 3 specialization trees have had their final unlock reduced from profession level 100 to 75. All professions with 4 specialization trees have had their final 2 unlocks reduced from profession level 100, which then got reduced to 75, to level 60 and 75. So keep that in mind. So you'll be, 60 is what you require to get that final one. So that's a big deal when it comes to that. That's coming up. If people who are trying to catch up on professions or doing professions on their alts. And then the trading post is currently disabled. It's like the line. I love this line. The trading post is currently disabled on PTR. Thank you again for testing and feedback. It's like, okay, so they either got what they needed or something's broken and they just want to leave it alone for a little bit and try and fix it. It's one or the other.
My guess would be, I think it's the former, and it's probably they want to have as many items that are going to be traded on there, like kept secret as possible. Just so have like a limited selection there. Okay, it works. All right, cool. We'll figure it out. But yeah, if you're logging into PTR thinking you're going to check out the trading post, sounds like you probably missed your window for this round of testing. Maybe it'll turn it back on as we get a bit closer. But the professions change is awesome, except it doesn't really do me any good on my main. It'll be good, I guess, if I start really getting into professions on alts. But by the time this patch comes out, even my blacksmithing on my little server will be 100. Once we get past the next Darkmoon Fair and everything, for sure. So, I mean, I think it's a great change. It's going to pay big dividends for the rest of this expansion, but it's kind of a bummer because it doesn't do anything for me. I would like to have all my sub specs unlocked at this point, but I gotta wait for 100. And yeah, the Mage Tower's been gone since I think 10.0 pre-patch went live, maybe even a little bit before that. I don't remember exactly when it went away, but if you want to do time walking Mage Tower, it's been a while since you've been able to, and if you want to start getting like a little taste of what it's going to look like with Dragonflight data, then you can do that on PTR now.
Yeah. Man. All right. Well, if you folks have enjoyed this episode, consider heading on your iTunes or Apple Podcast, leave us a 5-star review. They really help out our show, and we love reading them here from our listeners. We don't have any at the moment, but what we do have is a big shout out and thank you to all of our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. I'm giving a special shout out today to Arajian, Celian, Kapawi, Max, Mibble the Mighty, Nick, Shorel, and Zalius. Thank you so much for supporting the show, as well as all of our patrons. We appreciate everything you do. Our Patreon's live over at patreon.com/thestartingzone. You can head on over there and support our show that way. It helps us pay all the bills when it comes to funding the show, supporting the show, hosting the show, and posting the show. That's all part of all the ings that are involved with it. And big shout out and thank you to our newest patron, Kyle R. Thank you so much for hopping in, supporting out the show. We really appreciate it. And a great thank you to all of our patrons in 2022. Man, oh man, you have been amazing this past year, and we're looking forward to the plans we have for 2023. Obviously, BlizzCon stuff will be big if that's kicking off this year, which it sounds like there's every plan for it to happen. So Jason and I will be traveling down there, and we'll have some patron stuff for that as well, which will be exciting. So lots going on, and feel free to join the Discord over at startingzone.com/Discord if you're someone who's looking to chat as a patron with us, or you can always send us messages through Patreon itself, and we'll get those as well. But we're looking to mix things up a bit for patrons 2023, and we're still deciding on what exactly that looks like. But it's going to be exciting. So, yeah, thank you again to all of our patrons.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome aboard, Kyle. Glad to have you. And yeah, thank you, patrons, for all your support. And yeah, 2022 is a big year. And I think, man, based on the roadmap that we saw a few weeks ago, I think 2023 is going to be a pretty big year for this game as well. Yeah. And when the game is fun, it energizes people. And then I got to say, it's much more fun to do the show when people are energized than when they are not. And the energy has been very strong lately. So, yeah, we appreciate you all. And I mean, I'm looking forward to 2023. I think it's going to be a great year for the game. I can't wait to see what they have in store for us.
Yeah. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com or reach out to us on Twitter. And if you want to get your hands on some TSE gear, you can find that over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/thestartingzone. And you get shirts and mugs and stickers and all that sort of fun stuff over there. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald. And you can also find me streaming WoW over on twitch.tv/Shieldwald and youtube.com/Shieldwald. So come check that out as well. Streams are Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Sundays at 7:30 Eastern. And doing raids and keystones and other stuff afterwards usually. So come hang out. Stream's been a lot of fun lately. And if you want to get a peek at, Vault of the Incarnates or some of these Thundering Keys, then it's going on over there.
Nice. Next week's show is going to be a little bit heavier set because we, of course, have the last wing of Vault of the Incarnates to talk about. So there'll be a little bit more boss chat happening there for those who are interested in that sort of thing. But if you're trying to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey or over on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD or on YouTube at youtube.com/@SpencerHD. And with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening and jobs done.